Hey guys, what's going on? Just thought I would give you a little tutorial and kind of a walkthrough on the Industrial Revolution PowerPoint that I put up, I think it was yesterday. So you guys can go ahead and pull that up and kind of go along with me while we go through this. So obviously the first part, we're not going to be able to do the bell ringer, but just kind of want you guys to consider the bell ringer while you're looking at this. Maybe afterwards I can put something on Google Classroom where you actually answer this. So what do you think the Industrial Revolution is all about? And just kind of an easy outline and an easy way to look at this. The Industrial Revolution is when people stop making stuff at home and start making stuff in factories. Okay, so that's going to be a huge shift in the way the world is going to work. We're going to see where that starts, why it's impactful, and what that looks like long term, okay? So here's a couple of objectives to kind of consider. We're going to learn about the causes of the Industrial Revolution, learn why the Industrial Revolution starts in Britain, and learn the major inventions of the Industrial Revolution. Now it says you're going to be quizzed over this. Obviously, that's not something I can do right now, but still really good to know the content. Key ideas that I want you to take away is the causes of the Industrial Revolution and where it starts and why that's important. So number one, if you're going through the notes, you should see that there's like a couple of blanks where you can kind of fill in some areas. So just kind of go with me as we go through the slides. The Industrial Revolution was a period from the 18th to 19th century where major changes in ag, manufacturing, mining, transportation, and technology have a profound impact on socioeconomic and cultural changes. So let's talk about this word right here, socioeconomic. Socioeconomic has to relate to social classes and economic conditions. So the way we would look at that today is you would say you have your upper class, you have your middle class, and you have your low class. Okay, so that's tied to social status and also tied to economic status. So it's socioeconomics. Now, beside that, we've got cultural conditions. Now, culture has to relate to a lot of things, culture being language, arts, music, way of life, values, religion, and so on and so forth. So that could be a whole variety of things. So what's a way we can actually break this statement into smaller chunks? Want you guys to kind of consider that, okay? The way I would do that is just saying this is a time period in the 18th, 19th century that has a profound impact on the conditions of the times, okay? Now, the next part of this is there's going to be a little section where you're actually filling out vocab words and providing definitions. So this should be kind of the first part of that. And actually, I'm just going to take this over into the next slide because it's just going to be the same thing twice. Okay, so industrialization is a shift from an agricultural economy to one based in industry. Okay, so we were agrarian or agricultural, and now we are based in industry or manufacturing. Okay, so next term, perfect segue into that. Manufacturing is the use of machines, tools, and labor to make things for use or for sale. Okay, now after that we have rural. This is farming or country life, so sparsely populated areas. Next we have urban, which is just city life. Now key consideration here is it's going to be densely populated. Now after that we have the term urbanization. Now urbanization is just the movement of people to cities. Now that term probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense at this point, but we will come back to it at the end, okay? Next up we have a tenement. Tenement is a very important term to remember. It's going to be a little bit later in the unit that we're going on, and probably a little bit later in the class, but a tenement is a substandard multi-family dwelling, usually old and occupied by the poor. Basically, it is a small apartment that a lot of people live in because they don't have a whole lot of money and the city is densely populated, so a lot of people in one small area or one apartment. Next up we have free market, which is a market in which there's no economic intervention and regulation by the state. Okay, the state in this sense, that just means the government. That's why that's over here. You can see it on the end. It's got the parenthesis GOVT. Next up we have capitalism, which kind of goes hand in hand with free market. This is private ownership of means of production, basically saying that if you have the money and you have an idea, that you are not limited to what you can do or what you can make or what you can put in the market. You can do whatever you want as long as you have the money to back it. Now, after that, we've got socialism. So this is society, not the individual, owning and operating the means of production. So a little bit different than capitalism. Instead of someone privately owning it, it is society, society meaning group of people. Now, I've actually put the crash course video in your Google Classroom so you guys can kind of go through that on your own. I did want you to start this unit by watching that first and then kind of coming back to it, so just go ahead and do that. So pre-industrial revolution, this is going to be really important to consider as well. So we got village life that dominates. Families were nearly self-sufficient, meaning they almost did everything themselves. Most villagers are farmers at this time. Okay, making cloth before machines. This is really important too. Okay, this is all related to their industry at the time. So cottage industry is a slow process. It's literally people making clothes and selling clothes out of their houses, out of their, here's the word, cottage, okay? So businesses involving people who work at home, not too much different than what we're doing right now with coronavirus pandemic. A lot of people are working at home, but this is a little bit different. Obviously, we're service-based. This is more industry-based, okay, making goods and manufacturing goods. So old school way of doing it, making clothes in people's houses, selling straight from their houses. Okay. Also consider that many surnames originate from jobs. For example, maybe you know someone with the last name Baker. Okay, so if they have the last name Baker, then their ancestors could have been a baker. Okay, or maybe Smith. Smith would have been kind of also known with like a blacksmith. So just kind of consider that. Now, don't worry too much about the graphic organizer right now. This is something else I'm going to put on Google Classroom, but it is important to consider. You're going to have causes on one side, the Industrial Revolution, and then the effects. Okay, so we're going to have causes that caused the Industrial Revolution, then we're going to have the outcome. So I'll put that in Google Classroom, and you guys can kind of come back to it. So number one, we've got the Agricultural Revolution, which improves the quality and quantity of food. So farmers mixing different kinds of soil and trying new crop rotations. This is going to lead to higher yields. And if you have more food, then you're going to have a rapid growth in population. Okay. Next up, we have rich landowners pushing ahead with something called the Enclosure Movement. And this is basically just farmers or rich landowners taking lands and consolidating meaning bringing it all together and making it into one. So rather than have a bunch of small farms, you have a rich landowner buying up all the small farms and making one giant farm. New technologies and new sources of energy are also important. So for this, we have James Watt's steam engine becoming a key source of power. We're going to revisit that a little bit later in this slide. So rapid population growth. This is something I want you to really pay attention to. Notice the time periods and then notice the change in population. In almost every instance, it's about 100 years. And what we are seeing, at least with Britain and London, okay, Britain being the island, London being a major town in Britain, okay, is we're seeing almost a threefold, sometimes even 4 or 5-fold increase in population. But notice the families in agriculture, 100-year different, but the change is pretty stark there, okay? So 65% of the population in 1750 drops down to 25% of the population in 1851. So the Industrial Revolution begins in Great Britain. Number one, they have a stable government, which means they have no wars. They have capital or money to invest in businesses. They have overseas markets. Probably the most notable overseas market they had prior to the American Revolution would have been the colonies, okay? So natural resources, coal, this is going to be energy for machines, iron ore for tools, large network of rivers to move products. We've got labor supply, which means you have a growing population, a growing workforce, ready workforce, new technology, which example here, we've got invention and improvement of the steam engine, which is going to really dramatically increase the way people can move product, okay? So also notice on this map we have major coal fields and iron ore deposits. Notice how they are all located in Britain. Okay, so this big island right here, Wales, England, Scotland, that's Britain. Okay, so it's going to start in Britain right here, and then notice how we kind of go over in Europe and then across over into the eventual United States, but then the colonies at the time. So enclosure movement, this is a little bit more of what I talked about earlier. Also notice on this map how the closer you got to the center of England, okay, England, which is located in Britain, the closer you got to the center, the closer you got to larger towns, more enclosure occurred. Okay, so more land for pasture, larger fields for crops. Now think about this, something that laborers are going to lose, they're forced off their land, and then because they need work, they're going to move to growing cities. So one thing leads to another with enclosure movement. Farmers gain pasture lands for animals. They raise more sheep. Wool output increases. Larger fields are created. They're able to cultivate product more efficiently. And farm output is going to increase. So profits are going to rise. Okay, now here's an example of what I was talking about earlier, land enclosure movement. I want you to consider some of these plots of lands. We'll say that, you know, this plot, this plot, this plot, and this plot. So we've got these 4 back here. We'll say prior to land enclosure that those would have been their own farms. After enclosure movement, all that together is one giant farm. Okay, so what type of industry is popular or developed first? Well, textile industry. I'm going to link this in Google Classroom as well if you guys want to watch that. Maybe we'll have a discussion on it. Really important to watch that to kind of understand why textile is so important. Textile just means the basic product that we get to make clothes, like for example wool. Okay, so to make shirts and pants back in the day, they used to have to create wool, which was a part of the textile industry. So push factors, where are people going to go? We haven't talked about push or pull factors in this class a whole lot, but basic concept that you're going to have from this is a push factor is something that is pushing you out of a place, and a pull factor is something that's going to bring you in, okay? So push factor, this is pushing people out of an area. So there's fewer workers needed for the lands, rural lands located in Britain. Farmers are going to be forced off their lands. Small owners could not compete. Villages are going to shrink, and cities are going to grow and grow and grow. That's going to be a constant theme that you're going to see. Now, first major industry to form is going to be textile, like we just talked about. So the demand for cloth is going to grow. This is going to be a problem, though, because consumers at this time were paying a really high cost. So the solution is going to be to use machinery, because machines are more efficient than people in creating product. Okay, so their output's going to be a lot more efficient. So keep this in mind. We're going to talk about the spinning jenny a little bit later. So it reduces the amount of time and work needed to produce yarn. So this means increased productivity. Now notice this too. Textile factory workers in England, notice the amount of looms. So the amount of machines, the looms, to workers. Okay. So 2,400 in 1813, 150,000 workers. I mean, 20 years later, we have 85,000 looms and 200,000 workers. So looms are being created more, not necessarily taking people out of the workforce. You can see that you still got an increase, but making the productivity way more efficient. So growth of factories, this is going to be really important too, okay? So as demand for cloth grows, inventors come up with new machines. Examples here are going to be the flying shuttle, the spinning jenny that we just talked about. To house these new machine manufacturers built the first factories. So rather than stay in their cottages, they decided to build brick and mortar buildings to house these machines and send people to work in those areas. So new machines and factories increased production. By the 1850s, factories began to be powered by coal and steam engine. Okay, remember we talked about the steam engine earlier, so that's another tie-in here. So technological advances that produce the Industrial Revolution. Number 1, spinning jenny, steam engine, cotton gin by Ell Whitney. That's a really important and really controversial one that we're going to talk about. Process for making steel through Henry Bessemer. Spinning jenny, 1764. This is invented by James Hargreaves. At the time, cotton production could not keep up with demand, so this machine spun a lot of threads at the same time, which reduced the amount of work needed to produce yarn. So increased productivity equals producing yarn quickly. Okay, modern steam engine, 1763 to 1775. This is going to be improved by James Watt. This offers a dramatic increase in fuel efficiency. This could be produced to drive many different types of machinery. By the 1850s, most factories were powered by the steam engine. This increased the demand for coal to heat up the water to produce steam and the need for coal miners. So there's going to be an entire industry, coal industry, that is based on powering steam engines, okay? So Henry Bessemer process for the manufacture of steel. This is 1856, a little bit later. Bessemer involved using oxygen and air blown through molten pig iron to burn off impurities and creating steel. So this is going to lower the cost of steel production, leading to steel being widely substituted for cast iron. Steel is going to be used for production of guns and railway structures such as bridges and tracks. Other thing to consider here is when we get into these cities that I told you about that are getting larger by the day, growing and growing, well, you can only work with so much space that you have within a city. So instead of growing out, you're going to start growing up. Okay, that's how skyscrapers are invented. Steel is going to be more cost effective and it's very sturdy. Okay, so people are going to start building up and start building huge skyscrapers in major metropolitan areas such as New York City, such as Boston, such as Chicago. Okay. So here's the cotton gin. This is invented by Ell Whitney to mechanize the cleaning of cotton. This is a machine that quickly and easily separates the cotton fibers from the seeds, a job previously done by hand. Now this is going to have a pretty negative, pretty controversial outcome. This is going to lead to the demand for more slaves. This is one of those times in history where the idea behind the cotton gin, if you think about it, machines are supposed to create a situation where you don't have as much manpower necessary. However, some people obviously were being a little bit more greedy than they should have. In this example, slavery was still around, so a lot of rich landowners would kind of use that to their advantage. Okay, so this is going to lead to the demand for more slaves in the early 1800s. Now, here's another thing to consider: the impact of the railroad. Transportation innovation that most changed the way raw materials, goods, and people move. This is going to allow for the communication and trade between places that previously deemed too far. Okay, so if you notice here on this little graphic that we have, the amount of time saved by going through rail is going to be so big, and this is going to really have a big outcome on how people move product. Okay, so technology here, just kind of consider this. Industrial revolution is built on rapid advances in technology. Which of these three inventions most changed the way that raw materials, goods, and people move? So we have like a little, I guess it's kind of like a little steam engine on the far left. We have a train in the middle, and we have a ship, a steam engine ship on the far right. I want you guys to consider that. I may post that as a question later. Okay, so look out for that. So factories and mass production. Factory system changes the world of work. Mass production equals the production of large amounts of standardized products, especially on assembly lines. So here we have this idea that mass production is going to have elements where you have interchangeable parts and an assembly line. So production and repair are faster and more efficient. The effects out of this is going to be a dramatic increase in production. Businesses are going to be charged less, and goods are going to become more affordable. Okay, this is soon going to become the norm for most people. Now here is an example of the assembly line for you. Workers on the assembly line add parts to a product that moves along the belt from one workstation to the next. A different person performs each task along the assembly line. This division of labor made production faster and cheaper, thereby lowering the cost of goods. So here's a picture of the first assembly line, or one of the first assembly lines, Henry Ford's automobiles. I mean, truly automobiles had been around prior to Henry Ford, but he had kind of dramatically improved the assembly line, at least in the US. Okay. All right, so that's all I've got for you. So I want you to kind of go through that video. If you have any questions or anything like that, always you can email me or anything like that. Or, you know, if you ever need to go back and rewatch the video or pause on certain slides because you might have missed it, you can certainly do that. All right, see ya.